Steinberg. I'm the mayor of Sacramento. A happy and healthy Friday evening to you. I am really privileged to be joined by my soon-to-be colleague, City Council Member-Elect Katie Valenzuela, for, I hope, an informal and informative conversation about all the issues and challenges and opportunities facing the city. Katie, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this.
Of course, it's fun, you know. We are soon going to be colleagues, but I just thought, you know, in the days before you're swearing in, that it would be kind of fun to just have a public conversation about your aspirations, your district, how you see the city council, and all of it, and show all the people that you and I are working together. And working closely together. So that's a good thing. Tell me, when you get sworn in on Tuesday at 5 o'clock, first of all, unfortunately, I got to say, and I feel really bad about this, because of COVID, you don't get to like have that big personal celebration with all your family and all of your friends, you know, gathered together. It's a really special moment that it has to be done virtually. But tell me, how are you going to celebrate? Who's going to swear you in, and how are you going to do it?
My mom is actually going to swear me in, and yes, we are going to do a tech check before to make sure everything works properly. But yeah, she's going to be swearing me in from Bakersfield because she doesn't even get to come up, which is really hard. I mean, she was here for the last week of the campaign, and she would knock on doors and say, "Are you going to vote for my daughter?" And everyone's like, "I guess I have to." I've never had a mom come to my door.
Mom knocks, you have to. Exactly.
I mean, come on. So yeah, she's really excited, but we're bummed she can't come up because she's obviously in shelter in place in Kern County, just like us here in Sacramento. But yeah, we're going to do our best. So I'm doing a little volunteer appreciation the night before to tell everybody thanks who helped out. And yeah, trying to make lemonade here. My dad would call this a very high class problem. You're getting sworn into office, you don't get to have a party, but it is bittersweet for sure.
Yeah, well, you know, when we're through this, you'll have an opportunity to, you know, gather everybody in person. So here's a question for you. So as you're raising your right hand and taking the oath on Tuesday, what are you going to be thinking? Well, what is it? Put the experience in the perspective. What is it for Katie Valenzuela?
I'm going to be really hoping I don't mess up the words. There's a lot of people are going to be watching.
John Roberts messed it up. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a lot of people are going to be watching. So there's a little bit of things. I'm going to be definitely reading that over and over again this weekend to make sure I don't mess up. But honestly, I mean, it's just it's hard to describe because it's this mixture of excitement and anxiety and just, I mean, it's something that you've been working so hard for so long, which you understand when you're campaigning, and then to finally have that moment happen. I mean, it's just been a lifetime of work, and you know, thinking about my dad who's not with us anymore, thinking about my family and friends and volunteers who aren't really there but are there in spirit. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of feelings and thoughts for sure in that moment. My mom's convinced she's going to cry, which is going to be impossible because then I'm probably going to cry. And then it's just, hopefully you can still hear us when we get through with it.
Nothing wrong with tears of joy, you know?
Yeah.
For something really good. Tell people, I mean, you campaigned so hard and so effectively that people know your story, but maybe not everybody knows your life story. How did you come to this moment? Give us by the way, when I was sworn in my first city council office, I was 32 years old. So
I'm only a couple years older than 34. I will be. Okay. Yeah, Maya and I will be the first millennials, though. We're very excited. We talk about that. And I mean, I started when I was 13. My dad, you know, was really active in Kern County as a veteran, as a community advocate. And we had a huge problem with youth dropping out, youth getting into trouble. And these adults were all in the room trying to figure it out. And he was sitting there and said, you know, that maybe we should have a youth in the room to help us figure this out. And so my daughter will come on Monday. And that really got me involved, really, and stuck with me. And then I got to Davis on scholarship, and realized you could actually do that for a living through community development, which I never knew. So I stayed at Davis and got my bachelor's and master's and ended up staying in Sacramento because by then I'd moved here and worked in coffee, loved biking through Midtown and working at Chocolate Fish. Actually, their first Q and Third location was my first job in Sacramento officially, and really fell into the Capitol life, fell into advocacy and civil rights work and social justice work, which is how I met you when I was doing education policy work. And yeah, it just really became ingrained in this community at all levels.
And you've worked in and around the legislature for a long time. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started in education, and then actually my first job was a policy job, and I'd never done policy. And they said, "Oh, it's okay, we can teach you policy, but youth work and education." So, and then 2 weeks in, the last month of session, this, it was August of a 2-year session, and my boss called in the hospital, emergency appendectomy, wasn't coming in. She basically gave me your computer password and said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine," and hung up the phone. And I was like, okay. So I had these bills. It was the last, I'm like, I just figured it out. I like to joke that I know all the good places in the Capitol to cry because there was definitely a lot of learning, stressful moments, but really came to love it. Found out I was good at it and really enjoyed it. So I've done food access work with legalizing homemade cooking. I've done climate change through the Joint Legislative Committee on Climate Change Policies, and environmental justice is what I do now. And I really love it. The people who work there are really passionate, as you know, and are really trying to do good by Californians. And I love that we live in the capital city with that building and all that gets done there.
Right. And, we are a city, obviously, that is in the middle of the state capital. And we live in a very political culture. And certainly, I think the voters here in Sacramento pay more attention maybe than in other places for that reason. So you are described, and correct me if I'm wrong here, 2 terms that I want to ask you about: democratic socialist and the term activist. What does that mean? Tell me what that means to you, and how you view that as those terms as powerful labels of progress and change.
Yeah, I never considered myself a democratic socialist because we grew up as Democrats in Kern County, so you didn't even really openly say you were Democrats in Kern County. My parents learned very quickly to keep that to the side, but I always believed that people deserve a voice in decisions that impact them. I always believed that healthcare and education and housing and food were things that people shouldn't go broke paying for, that they deserved. I have always believed in people in an economy that doesn't create this huge disparity between the haves and have-nots, and the people who are working in the economy deserve to share in that prosperity. And when Bernie Sanders ran, actually, it was the first time that I realized that all these things I believed had this larger label, this larger umbrella of democratic socialism. And that's really what it comes down to for me, is fighting for the people, fighting for the workers, fighting to make sure people have a fair shake and really get what they need to thrive. So that's what that means to me. And, this is a county that Bernie Sanders won. This is a state that Bernie Sanders won. I really think that it speaks to the values of California, of making sure we want to take care of each other. We want everybody to have a fair shake and a voice. And I really I'm excited to be the first openly democratic socialist on the council, but I know I'm probably not going to be the last. And when it comes to activism, I've been an organizer since I was 13, and I've done a lot of work through my job, a lot of work not through my job when it comes to the urban ag ordinance, the community land trust, starting neighborhood associations, going door to door. And to me, it's about really helping communities find their own voice and really providing a path for folks to advocate for themselves and to really push for the change that we need. Government works for us. The money is ours. We're here to serve, as you know. And so that's a big part of what I'm hoping to bring into City Hall, is just a different style, different experience of doing things, and hopefully bringing in more engagement and more buy-in to what we do at the city.
So you have worked in and around the Capitol, and you know the process of legislation, and passing a bill can be hard, slow, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, amendments, compromises. And so how do you feel about translating activism into actually getting something done within that representative government. How do you translate that from the way you experience and think?
I think that people power is the most effective advocacy tool we have. And I've seen that at the Capitol. I've seen youth stop budget hearings talking about what they want for themselves, what they want for their younger siblings out of our public school system. I've, worked with cooks who were trying to legalize homemade food and, everything that we've done and that we're continuing to do. It does take time, but it's been done. And I think what we're really learning in our movement is how to do it more effectively. And that's what you see in people's budgets. A great example, right? 4,000 people have taken that survey in the city of Sacramento. And that's not just getting information from folks, that's building a movement of people who care about the budget, who want to have a say in where money goes in their communities, which is so powerful. And that's really what I've seen the activists building in Sacramento is that a very policy change. A lot of the work that we did on the urban ag ordinance, we know how to get to 5 votes. We know what that takes from a community organizing perspective, from a policy perspective. And the process is so important to building inclusion and building that power to make that change happen for our communities. So I've been lucky to be a part of it at all levels of government, including here in Sacramento, and I'm excited about what opportunities exist now that I'm on the other side of the dais and able to really think differently about how I can help facilitate more of that change from my new role.
And I want to talk about the people. I want to talk about the people's budget for a moment. Because it's very interesting to me, and something that you and I am sure we'll talk a lot about together. Because I know in my first 4 years that what I've tried to do through Measure U and through a lot of work around defining inclusive economic development is to not substitute sort of the basic services as the important thing that our city does, but to add to what we consider core and important. And we've had some pretty hard battles with a number of the existing stakeholders, some of my colleagues, about how far, quote, out of our lane the city should go in investing, for example, directly in affordable housing or workforce development or small business along our sometimes forgotten commercial corridors. Talk about the people's budget. Is it consistent with this notion of inclusive economic development? Is it different? What do you actually want to do and accomplish with that?
It's absolutely consistent. And I think, first I have to always say that this was really modeled after something Black Lives Matter Los Angeles started in Los Angeles and really built a movement around down there that has led to some transformative change in their budget in the city of Los Angeles. And really, at first, it's about making sure people know where the money's going and they have a say and they're setting the priorities. They're helping us decide. But really, this came out of the protest after the murder of George Floyd and talking to organizers of those events and feeling like we were looking for something more. We were trying to figure out what is the root, like how do we move upstream on this challenge and really tackle this at the root. And for us, this came back to investment in communities. It came back to inclusive economic development. It came back to youth services and mental health services and the things that really make communities safe. And I'm excited that the city's embraced this broader definition of safety, because I think often about the analogy or the story of, you're at the river and you're picking trash out of the river and there's more and more trash coming and you're having to spend more and more time picking trash out of the river, when someone really should be going upstream and figuring out why so much trash is ending up in the river in the first place. And can we stop that from happening before there's harm created, before we're having to clean up the situation? And, when you're calling 911, multiple systems have failed. We've talked about this, by the time an emergency like that has happened, a lot has gone wrong in the process. And we have an opportunity, I think, in Sacramento to really think about how do we make communities safer by investing, by making sure people have economic opportunity, that youth have good job opportunities and mental health resources and training to really get them out of the situation where they might end up interacting with our criminal justice system. And so that's really what we're hearing in people's budget overwhelmingly, is that people want to prioritize housing and homelessness services. They want to prioritize youth. They want to prioritize inclusive economic development more than anything else, because we recognize that that's what really makes us safe.
Is participatory budgeting a term of art, or is it just a a way that cities ought to be doing budgeting across the board.
Yeah, it became a term of art, but I wish it should be the latter, right? It should just be, I always start, people's budget conversations like, this is our money. We pay these taxes, and we should be able to know where the money goes, what is achieved, what is not achieved, and really have a voice in where that money should go moving forward. And I think, Sacramento is really well positioned to lead on this and to really show what that looks like, not just to take a few $1 million and say, oh, practice on this, but to really make this a system wide, like, let's do department by department workshops. Let's really talk about what's happening in each department of our city, in each neighborhood in our city, and really build a budget based on what we want to achieve, not just based off of higher, lower than previous year spending. So I hope participatory budgeting becomes more of just how we do things. And that's something I'm looking forward to working with you on this year.
Me too. How do you respond to the concern or criticism that I know I sometimes get that, all this is good, but, when it comes to health and human services, social services, a lot of the things you're talking about and the things that I talk about really are county functions. The county has $1 billion plus budget or multi-billion-dollar budget around health and human services. And, you're spending all this time on all of this, but it's really a county function. Why should we be involved as a city in all of this? What do you say to that?
I mean, they're not wrong, right? There is some role for the county in this, and that's what's been so great about the people's budget process, is just reminding folks that as much as we were fighting over the $89 million in CARES money that we got, there was $181 million at the county that was largely going to the sheriff that we should have been trying to intervene in sooner. So I think it's really broad in the conversation to look at both. Everyone in the city lives in the county, but I also think that it's hard to see what we're seeing in the communities and not want to do something about it if we can. And I think we can as a city. A lot of why I ran was because of the suffering I was watching with our unhoused neighbors. It was because of what I was seeing happen in some of the neighborhoods here that I love and care about. New Helvetia CV Circle's just outside of downtown, but it might as well be 10 miles away for the lack of services and resources over there. So I really think that if we can do something, we must. And I think it's really both. It's not either or. It's really about both. And how do we really work together to achieve Sacramento that works for everybody?
That's true. So you do represent maybe the most, I don't know if this is the right term, the busiest district in the city in terms of it being the central city, downtown, the heart of a lot of the business activity in the city. And critics would say, as they've said to me about some of my initiatives in politics, if you do too much on the service end without building up the economic base and making the city and the downtown business friendly, then you're never going to have the resources to be able to do all the things you want to do. What do you say to your business constituents in District 4 in the central city about your approach and how you want to be both a progressive a progressive city council member, and at the same time protect the economic vitality of the district that you're going to lead?
Yeah, I think it's come up a lot. One thing I love about District 4 is just how, people think I've just been cruising for the last 8 months, and I swear week 1 after the election, people were like, hey, we got to talk to you. What do we need? Is that, there's two ways to look at economic development. One is where you invest in the top and kind of assume that benefits will go down and help workers, and which will then help communities and onward and upward. Or you can really invest in the people and in the communities and really let that build the foundation upon which a successful business can really thrive. And the number one call I'm getting from businesses, the number one complaint on all the calls I've been on has been homelessness, right? They say, well, how am I supposed to run a business? How am I supposed to book the convention center? How am I supposed to do this work if there's folks all around who are living and suffering around my facility? So, this is just a different theory of change. If we invest in the neighborhoods, we invest in the people who are here, we invest in the workers, we will build a stronger economy from that. And I really do believe that. I think that's one of the keys to successful businesses is having customers who can afford to go and get dinner at your restaurant, and not having folks sleeping in your doorways because they have a safe and warm place to be at night. Those are the sort of things that really build for the long term and really give us the type of things that we can weather these storms. Part of the reason we're suffering so hard in COVID is because so few people had savings. So few people really had the ability to weather the storm when it hit. And I think we should learn from that and really think about how do we build from the bottom up.
Let's talk about homelessness for a moment, because it certainly is the issue that dominates significant amount of my time and attention. And I know you have identified it as one of your top, if not your top priority. And you invited me, and I want to thank you again publicly for the invitation to be part of and address the task force you put together in District 4 to get ahead and running, a head start, a running start in terms of figuring out how we can all collectively do better. Talk about it a little bit. We done a lot of good things, and we've actually housed a lot of people, but people continue to become homeless. What do you want to do with me and with your colleagues and with your constituents to make this better?
Yeah, the task force, and thank you again for coming. I thought that was an incredible first conversation. And, as I was meeting with all these different stakeholders and realizing just how much they had in common in terms of what they wanted, we all want people on the streets to have a safe place to go. We don't want people to be suffering where they are. And I think, the first step has to be stabilizing and keeping people safe where they're at. It's the warming centers, it's the safe camping, it's the safe parking. How do we just give people a place to be, which was overwhelmingly what the advocates were saying on the call. Like, we just need a place for people to be right now. And I mean, it's the overwhelming calls I get, or when camps spring up in places where either the occupants or the neighbors don't feel safe. And now we're dealing with a situation that's not sustainable. So how can we stabilize things where they're at so that we can work on stopping the inflow and increasing the outflow, right? It's like, how do we build up emergency rent assistance so that it's not, losing your job isn't an automatic, cause to not be able to make your rent that month? How do we build up those programs that help homeowners and renters keep their housing and stay stabilized so we can stop the inflow, the mental health services, the drug services that keep people from reaching a point of crisis? And then how do we increase the units for folks to go into afterwards and get creative about, how do we do scattered site and all the different models of housing that we can do to really give people a place to exit into, so that we kind of interrupt the cycle and really move people out permanently. And I think we really have a lot to learn from in Sacramento, from all the work that's been done by yourself and others, and can really build on that for solutions. And we are the capital city, and hopefully what we do here can really push the state to start pushing other jurisdictions to do that as well. But it has to start with, how do we keep people safe now? I know you've been haunted by, I'm sure, the story of Mr. Tarola, who died near Loaves and Fishes in the cold a few weeks ago. It's a story that's stuck with me a lot. And he's not the first. He's not probably going to be the last at this rate. And so I know you're working hard on that, and I really hope to help make that happen so we can keep people safe right now, and while we work on those solutions and addressing the root cause.
We'll have some initial announcements early next week on the warming center question, but it will only be the beginning. We're going to need more and more. It's not even winter yet, and it's already cold outside. So I'm not asking you to commit to any of my proposals, but I would love to just hear your thoughts about the notion that I put out this week, that one of our problems around citing is we fight every citing question, project by project and site by site. And in some way, it's the nature of the funding streams being ad hoc, and we grab the money where we can from the state or the feds or local, and then we put it to a particular project. And I've thought over the last couple of months that as we get started working together in the second term, that we ought to, my second term, your first, that what we ought to do is do the hard work up front to develop a master siting plan. And we ought to take a vote on multiple sites at one time. And once we vote yes, which we're going to get to yes in one way or another, then we're not re-arguing or re-litigating each of the individual siting decisions, and we can give the direction then to our city staff and our city team to go implement what it is we directed. What are you? I'm not asking you again to commit to my proposal here, but what in general do you think about the idea of a broader master plan?
I mean, I think it's great, and like I've said, it really builds off of, this is where I always tell people, we agree on like a lot of things. And this is one of those things where it's like, we both had this thought, and you had this thought and around how do we create a strategy, right? Like we need to actually have like, here's what it is. And like a siting plan is a big piece of that. Like we have to identify where these sites can be and really then work on the funding and solutions to make that work. And it has to be in every district because it's going to take that much. I mean, we have 5,000 people on the street that we know of, and an estimated 10,000 folks who are touching homelessness throughout the year. That's a lot of beds. That's a lot of new housing. That's a lot of places that we're going to need to identify. Even if we do small site, short-term camping and parking, like if it's 12 to 24 folks on a site, divide that into 5,000, that's a lot of sites again. And so, yeah, I really appreciate where you're going with that. And I do support the concept of having a master plan for siting. I think it'll help us, like you say, hopefully jump down the line a little bit in the conversation and really start talking about how and not where. And we've all been having these conversations in our districts in different ways around like folks who just don't want it near them. They are worried because they've seen it go wrong and they've seen it not work. And they're like, well, what does this mean? Is it going to be like the river district? Is it going to be like this? And so I think it'll really help us just jump to the trust building and like the planning part, and be a really cool exercise for all of us to undertake so that we can make this work and actually do the thing that we say we want to do, right? Which is like get everybody off the street, get everybody a place to
be. What it's going to take, and I know that you have got the willingness, and I know my colleagues do too, but it is going to take a lot of hours on Tuesday afternoons in public session, engaging with the community even virtually, as we have to over the first number of months, to actually go district by district, actually identify the site so that the plan is not just theoretical, or we're not punting to say, well, we'll come back in 3 months to first vet this or that. I mean, that's the way the game can be played, but that's not what I think we need to do. We got to get at identifying the sites across the city within the first couple of months of this year. And it's going to take a lot of grit and a lot of seat time on those Tuesdays to really get there. But I'm really encouraged by the fact that you, even before you get sworn in, that you're taking, again, that term activist and organizer, and you're actually doing it in a way that is consistent with one of the major challenges that we face in the city. So I'm really looking forward to all of that together. Tell me, this is a question you wouldn't expect necessarily. Again, working in the Capitol, do you think Sacramento gets its fair share of state resources when it comes to the way different funding streams are allocated and divided, and what can we do to do better?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a theme for a while with the climate investments alone. Has been a whole pot of like, why isn't it coming here? And yeah, I think it's funny. I've often struggled with this idea that like Sacramento, everyone's so focused on the capital that sometimes I feel like we forget that there's a whole city around that actually has some really deep needs. And I think folks have gotten better. Like, we just pulled down with the city before I left the land trust $1 million grant to help work on the, Morrison Creek Trail through the park bond. And like, we've gotten better at navigating and working with that. But I think it's definitely a challenge, and I'm hopeful. I don't know, part of what, in terms of their temporary council member, when they live up here for 2/3 of the year, I'm hoping that more lawmakers will get to know Sacramento a little bit better. And there are challenges, like even environmental justice, right? Like I work in state environmental justice, and they'll say, oh, Sacramento doesn't have those challenges. And I'll be like, are you serious? Like, of course we have those challenges. Like, let me talk to you about what's going on here. And it's just, I feel like we have a lot of work to do on that front. And it's something I really want to help with our experience, right? And doing state policy. And you obviously have more of that than I do. But I think, we can really leverage the fact that we're here, that we can walk to the Capitol, that they're all here all the year, and try to see if we can fix some of that.
I want to, we got a few more minutes. It's a half hour, but they say we can go beyond. We could even go 40 minutes if you wanted to, but I want to be respectful of your time. A few more minutes. So the city council, you alluded to this a few moments ago, passed a resolution about a month ago that was brought forward by my colleague and your colleague, to be Jay Schneer, to redefine public safety, to expand public safety, to include investing in young people, to include alternative responses to crisis situations that don't involve a violation of the law, for example, on the police side. Talk about public safety. I would bet you would have voted for that resolution. Is my bet. But I think it's good to talk a little bit about how you view public safety, how you view the role of police, for example, in a city like Sacramento, how you view the fire service and the important role that they play as well. Because people can easily stereotype, any politician. I sometimes feel that way. Maybe you feel that way as well. But talk about public safety.
Yeah, and that resolution was another great example of activists helping make change as well, right? Because Councilmember Schneer worked with really great community leaders who've been fighting that fight for a while. And I think really see that as a foundational step to the broader conversation we're hoping to have around spending and priorities in the city. And I mean, for me, public safety is not needing to call 911. For me, public safety means that, communities have what they need to deal with crises, to mitigate and hopefully prevent, trauma, which can lead to crime. The phrase, hurt people. It's just, how do we invest in those sort of situations, and make sure that every neighborhood has what they need to not get into the situation where there's a crisis going on and 911 is needed. It doesn't mean that we don't need emergency response. And I don't think anybody who's talking about public safety reform would ever say, oh, you should call 911 and nobody's going to come. Like, of course, we think someone should come if there's a crisis going on, whether it's a heart attack or someone's, got a gun pulled on somebody. Like, you need people who can respond to those situations. But it's also about balance and really trying to see how do we make sure the pendulum doesn't swing too far over into public safety in the conventional sense, that we lose sight of the fact that maybe that gun wouldn't have been pulled if that person hadn't been a victim themselves or hadn't had a series of interactions happen that led to that moment where that gun was pulled. So I think we've learned a lot through a lot of really innovative work here in Sacramento, whether it's with MH First, whether it's with peacekeepers and different counseling programs and youth intervention and the pop-ups, and have really seen what can happen when we offer these alternatives and we invest in those different strategies. So I'm really hopeful that this resolution can really lead to a new conversation, because like Dr. Kofer likes to joke about, but she's very serious, I think, when she says, like, public safety isn't having someone respond to solve my murder. Hopefully public safety means that I never got, attacked in the first place, and that we really look at it from that wider lens.
Yeah. Well, so are you meeting with have you met with police officers and firefighters and talked to them about the jobs that they do and the way they see their challenges?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did a ride along with the police when I was campaigning. I've talked to both, the local union for the firefighters as well as the police in the last few weeks to hear from them. I think, and a great example when it comes to policing, right? Like the central city core, I'm hearing consistently from officers and captains and sergeants that 80% of their time is spent responding to homelessness related calls, right? And so that to me is the perfect example of like, okay, this is resources, because I consider people and like the money we spend on those people, as part of that equation, that are being spent on something downstream that could potentially be spent if we could, address the homelessness crisis by providing spaces and places for folks to go. would we need that level of police service in the central city? And that's a question I pose to the Police Officers Association. It's like, for me, it's not about more or less, staffing levels compared to other cities. It's really about what do we think we need, and how can we adjust to ensure we're addressing those needs. And same thing with fire. And, it's like, if you're having a heart attack, if your building's on fire, you want to know that someone's going to respond because obviously those are really urgent needs. And so how do we understand where there are gaps from a really methodological, sorry, I think I messed up that word, from a methodical, that's the word, from a methodical point of view, so that we're using data and best practices to really inform how we spend, so that it's not just higher or lower than previous years and trends, but it's really about, what do we think we need, and what are the goals that we're trying to achieve, what are the communities saying that they think they need, so that we can invest in response to that.
One of the initiatives that I hope you will really adds, energy to is what we started, and only started with the Office of Community Response. The idea that we are going to stand up, we've already stood up a separate office in the city, separate from the police or fire department, that when built up is going to be our first responder to many of the calls that shouldn't require a police or fire response. And, use the cliche, the devil's in the details, right? I mean, domestic violence being a good example, you might say, well, that should have a social service response, but it's a crime, right? When somebody is being victimized in that way. And so how do we create something that is real, that is big, that is sustained, but that has all parts of our broader public safety infrastructure working together? Thoughts about how we grow that, or make it move even faster than what we started?
Yeah, I think it's the concept of having different people go out when there's a 911 call that meets certain criteria is very well founded in best practices around the country. And we've seen it work well. We've seen it work well here with MH First and different examples of systems where people have successfully intervened in situations. And, I've had police tell me and that they know when they show up for a 5150, which is a mental health call, when you show up when someone's in drug crisis, that tends to escalate a situation, because what they're having to do is put someone in the back of a police car to take them to the hospital or take them someplace. And wouldn't it be great if we had an alternative system that didn't? I mean, that's not what police are trained for. And that's really they're not the most appropriate people to respond to that. And so how do we work with the county? Because the county has to designate other people to be able to do 5150s so that we can actually build that system and make that shift real. And that's going to mean reevaluating the current breadth of what the police are being asked to do, because right now they're being asked to do everything that doesn't neatly fit into another box. If we're not sure, we call the police because, okay, they're there and they'll come because of 911. So we really need to then reevaluate what that appropriate budget looks like and what the appropriate level of function is, so that we can invest meaningfully in the alternative so that they can work. And no one's talking about flipping a switch. Sorry, I keep mixing up my words tonight. Overnight. It's really about starting with a meaningful investment. Like, what would it look like to take $50 million, right, out of law enforcement, which seems like a ton, but to really invest in these workers, really invest in this prevention, and to hold ourselves accountable to the metrics, right, and to saying, okay, how did it work? What happened in real time? So we know if there's gaps, if something starts to go wrong, and we can adjust really quickly to ensure that safety needs are still being met. But that's the sort of work, really progressive work, that I think Sacramento's ready for, that the people's budget is really telling us that they're ready for. 80% of the people who filled out that survey said they wanted less money in law enforcement. And it wasn't because all of them are saying, law enforcement are bad people. I mean, that's definitely a dynamic in some cases, but it was because they were pointing to homeless services. They were pointing to mental health services. They were pointing at youth services and drug services and saying, that's what we want more money to go into. And I think that's really where we need to be envisioning as a community what this means and what that means for our budget spending when we make that vision together.
Well, you will have, along with all of us, your first opportunity, pretty soon in 2021. And I always say, whatever level of government you're serving in, the budget is the most important value statement of any government, because it really does define what your and our collective priorities are. So That is a very, very important part of the work. I really enjoyed this. I'm not going to ask you like, how do you want to be remembered at the end of your first term? Or I'm not doing it. This is those are the corny cliche questions. I just thought it would be really cool to do just what we did, which is to have a conversation and let people hear what you hope to accomplish and the direction you want to take the city. And I look forward, Katie, to working with you. I think it's we're going to have a very interesting time as we try to help pull the city out of this COVID, era and rebuild the economy and address this homeless problem with a ferocity that is going to be necessary in order to make people feel the impact, right, and help more people. Any closing thoughts that you want to share?
No, thank you for the chance to have this conversation. I haven't, usually you do these meetings when you're coming into office and people immediately launch into their 30 minutes of what they want to say, and nobody ever gets a chance to ask any questions personally. So I appreciate this, and I'm really looking forward to getting started finally. I know you know what it's like to have a very long on-ramping period, and I've been very eagerly waiting on the sidelines to get access and opportunity to make change. So yeah, I hope that folks are excited and interested in what I had to say and maybe challenge me, which is totally fine too. I think engagement is really the heart of it. And yeah, looking forward to getting to work.
Me too. Look forward to seeing you at least virtually next week, and have a great weekend. Okay.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.